Good evening, everyone across the Foothills of Western Piedmont. This is Daniel Crawley, Foothills Action Network, and our Chief Meteorologist, Chris White. It is that time of the year. We are getting ready to reveal our 2020-21 winter outlook for Western North Carolina. And Chris, it looks like it could get kind of interesting around here. A lot of different things that could be in play this winter, probably some different things compared to recent years. But nonetheless, we're looking forward to what may be happening over the next 3 months or so.
Yeah, it sure could. This is my favorite time of the year, and we do want to say a big thank you to Habaneros Mexican Restaurant out on Independence Boulevard in Morganton for sponsoring our winter forecast and winter outlook. When you're headed up the mountain this winter to check out some of the northwest flow snow, be sure to stop by Habaneros and have a burrito.
Yeah, Habaneros, there's some great folks that run that establishment, and again, we thank them for sponsoring the winter outlook. So let's kind of go into the headlines of the winter, Chris. A lot of things that are going to be in play. First off, lots of variability expected in the overall pattern. I think that's something that we've really kind of seen all year, maybe the last couple of years. Seems like we get a lot of back and forth things happening. It gets warm one minute, cold the next, a lot of rain, dry spells, just a little bit of everything happening. This year, one of the big changes is we have a building La Nina. And Chris, if you will, talk a little bit about La Nina.
Yeah, so let's take a look in the Pacific Ocean. And we're talking about the waters in the Pacific Ocean along the equator. They're going to be cooler than normal. They already are cooler than normal, but they're only going to cool, it looks like, going over the next 3 to 4 months. So with La Nina in place, that can definitely mean a cutoff to the moisture into the southeast United States.
Yeah, that La Nina looks like it will build into 2021 and become stronger. And what you kind of alluded to right there, when you get a La Nina, you tend to have an absence of the subtropical jet stream. If you're around here for the last few years, it seems like we've had a lot of subtropical jet influenced storms. And I think this year we're not going to see as much of that. You're going to see a little bit more of the northern stream of the jet to dictate the storm pattern. So that and it's interesting, and this is the last headline, the early winter pattern may not exactly indicate the establishment of the negative or of the La Nina. So things are going to really kind of change here, I think, early on. Yep. And then as we get later into the winter, things may actually kind of not really get stagnant, but kind of get locked in.
That's right, Dan. It really does. And, maybe locked in is not the thing we look for this year. We want to get locked into a good pattern. If you love winter and winter weather, it may not happen so much that way this year. Let's talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. Let's look. First thing we like to look at all the time when we come up with a winter forecast is the Arctic snow and ice cover. And basically, this is the northern hemisphere, the Arctic Circle. The areas in white over Siberia and over northern North America is the current snowpack. Now, Chris, the one thing I really see looking at this, there's not as much snowpack over North America that we've seen compared to the past.
Yeah, take a look at that area in southwestern Canada. Those 2 areas, 3 areas right there, have seen the snow by this point every year over the last 3 years. And we've even seen it drag down into the Rockies. Now, you can see the Rockies had the higher peaks are certainly snow-covered there, but we are certainly running below normal in regards to snowpack over North America. Siberia looks pretty good, and we're getting the decent ice up over the Arctic, but it just doesn't look very healthy when you look up there at the snowpack and exactly how much they've got.
Yeah, I mean, it's common this time of year to have snow all the way down into the Dakotas, Montana, over into Minnesota. We just don't have it right now.
That's right.
I think that's one thing that's going to play into our forecast. Then the next thing that we always look at are the different teleconnections and what's going on globally, because the global weather pattern does have a lot to do with what's happening here. So the first thing is the Madden-Julian oscillation. And Chris, I'll let you explain a little bit about that.
Yep, so the Madden-Julian oscillation, we're looking at the convection out over the Indian Ocean and how far east it comes. You can see it can come all the way out into the western Pacific at times. And those phases of 7, 8, 1, sometimes 2, can produce some winter weather here in our area 2 weeks out when we start to see it moving into that area. And Daniel, you can see where we've been over the last month or so.
Yeah, looking at what was going on in the middle of October, we were in phase 5 of the Madden-Julian oscillation. It transitioned quickly into 6 and 7, and it's currently right now at 8, and it really makes a lot of sense. You said 8, 1, and 2 are the active patterns for North America. Think about all the tropical activity that we've had recently. Think about the chances of rain we may have next week. We're solidly in that active pattern, but as we go later into November and into the first part of December, we may wander back into 3 and 4 as well. The thing to remember about the MJO, for it to make a loop all the way around, it's about a 2 to 3 week pattern.
It really is. It really is.
And that's kind of, how, when you mentioned earlier, what you see at a certain point may translate to what we see 2 weeks later. That's how that works. It's a global pattern that works its way around the globe. And you can also, here in the middle, you've got the null phase. That's kind of a negating factor of any specific part of the MJO if it wanders around in the null phase. So right now we're in 8-1. It's an active weather pattern. But once we get later into November and then when the winter starts, we're probably not going to start the winter in a favorable MJO.
No, and right now, where I would like to see this thing at, it would be maybe a 5 or 6 and moving west, into 7 and 8. But we're already there in 8, and of course we've had the Ida down in the Caribbean that's produced. I mean, it's become a huge hurricane here, and this oscillation just shows you when you get over into the 7, 8. 1 and coming out of 1 into 2, when you can get that favored development down over the eastern United States and then the Caribbean.
Yeah, and there's always a chance that you can get into the null phase and then work your way quickly back into 8 or 1.
Yep.
That happens sometimes. It hasn't really happened here in the last month or so, but that's always a possibility as well. We'll keep an eye on that. That Madden-Julian oscillation updates, I believe, once or twice a week.
Yep.
So we can kind of see what's going on as far as what phase that it's in. So that's something that we will keep an eye on. And the later you get into winter, it seems like the MJO is more dominant.
That's right. And it's been so dominant right now, it's an anomaly. It's overcoming the La Nina that's already in play. And we're able to get these big systems that come up into the east coast of the United States. So that's a large factor into the overall synoptic pattern. The Madden-Julian oscillation, where it's at now, is very favorable for storminess along the east coast.
Yeah. And the next thing we look at the teleconnections, and it's the first thing we look at is the North Atlantic oscillation. And we talk about this a lot in the wintertime, it seems like, here in eastern North America. When you have a positive North Atlantic oscillation, there's really no blocking or anything going on, and the flow is pretty much west to east across the Atlantic. But when you get into the negative phase of the North Atlantic oscillation, blocking tends to develop, usually around Greenland. It could work its way as far west as eastern Canada, or it could work east of Greenland and be an east-based negative NAO. Looking at what's happening here, we are currently in a pretty positive NAO, but as we get later into November and eventually into December, when we get to about right here, you notice that the NAO goes negative.
Yeah.
Not strongly negative, but it goes negative.
I like to see that. Getting down into the -2 range on the NAO. When we pull out of those, sometimes you'll get a storm on the East Coast. So this leads us to believe that sometime you could see around December 3rd to December 4th time frame, maybe some volatility in the East Coast pattern and maybe getting a storm that would run north up through there.
Yeah, that is definitely very interesting to see that we go strong from negative back into positive. Like you said, when you get a quick shift like that, you tend to get storms develop across the eastern U.S. Now, I'm not We're not saying it's going to snow here
Yeah.
the first week of December.
Yeah, right.
But don't be surprised if you see some kind of significant weather event around that time because it's a shift in that oscillation. So
That's right.
That's something we'll keep an eye on. And of course, when you get into December, you can't really rule anything out as far as frozen
That's
precip.
absolutely right. And that's the control going that far negative. Take a look at this. The mean average of all the ensembles is very slightly negative. So it's not as big of a dip and a return to positive phase as the control model is.
Yeah, and that's something we'll definitely keep an eye on as well. Next thing we look at is the Pacific North America oscillation with the PNA. Essentially what this is the synoptic or the pressure pattern over the western coast of North America. And we are currently in a positive PNA. You've probably noticed we've had a cold spell here the last couple of days. When you have a positive PNA, you tend to dump cold air from Canada into the United States. But if you see on the projections here, we are quickly going to go into a negative PNA, which is that kind of zonal top pattern.
Yep.
And if you've noticed our forecast, we're going to warm up in the next 5 to 7 days. That is directly a result of the negative PNA. But then if you keep working your way through November and into December, we're going to start the winter pretty much with a negative PNA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly looks that way. And, you know, the control model shows some volatility there in the PNA where we swing negative and go slightly positive back and forth. But overall, the ensembles are pretty steady on that thing and keeping it in the negative phase all the way through the middle of December.
So, Chris, let's kind of go into the meat and potatoes of the forecast. Talk about this primary synoptic pattern.
Yeah, the primary synoptic pattern is just what we talked about. It's really attributed to that PNA, to the NAO, and to the Madden-Julian oscillation. All that goes into us building this forecast of where we think the main battleground is going to set up, and that is along that red line, and that's the northern jet stream. So you can see it stays north of our area the majority of the winter, and we're talking about the primary synoptic pattern here. To the north of that, of course, you're cold because there's cold air to our north, and to the south of there we would be warmer, and you'll see that in the slides coming up. But there is, Daniel, a secondary pattern that we're looking at setting up here.
Yeah, this secondary pattern is more what falls in line with the potential negative North Atlantic oscillation. Even though you may have a lack of a PNA, you're still going to have this flow that's going to cut across the middle of the country, but then it has to make a sharp turn to the north and even northwest if blocking were to develop. And I think, Chris, that we could run into the potential of a negative NAO pattern at least one time this winter.
Yep, absolutely. And it looks like that would come early in the winter time, whether it's in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whether it's in 4 to 6 weeks. It's just hard to tell right now. But we do believe that secondary pattern will develop at least once this winter and bring that battleground jet stream, northern jet, down over our area and possibly produce some type of big storm on the East Coast. Whether it's snow or rain here, it's hard to say. We're not talking about. We can't predict to that pinpoint level of what type of precipitation is going to fall, but we could say, hey, this is kind of what it looks like. So we will kind of watch this time frame through the winter. And I really think as we go on, you'll be able to see early winter. We're going to have to get these winter events in here early winter to get any type of significant winter weather event over our area.
So let's look at kind of a breakdown of our local area, the Carolinas, most of the Southeast. First off, for temperatures, I think given the fact that we're going to have that negative PNA for a good part of the winter, you're not going to have a lot of cold air intrusions, and I think generally you're going to end up with temperatures above normal. That also kind of plays into the La Nina. Mm-hmm. Normally, it's going to be drier than we've had recently. Not as much of the subtropical jet, keeping clouds and precip in place. So we're going above normal temperatures. Now, temperatures, when you get into the peak of winter toward the end of January, are generally averaging in the upper 40s and mid to upper 20s at night. So when we say above normal temperatures, on average, we're probably talking 1 to 3 degrees above. We're not talking about 70s all the time. We're not talking about summer.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're talking about generally warmer than normal.
Another part that goes into this too, the warm sea surface temperatures over the Atlantic. So as you get closer to the Atlantic, you can see the well above normal temperatures down there with the warm sea surface temperatures, the anomaly there, and then you've got the PNA. We definitely could see well above normal temperatures for our southeastern coastline.
Yeah, and then when you get up in the Ohio Valley where we feel like that jet stream is going to be established a lot, they're probably going to have below normal temperatures. They're going to have an active weather pattern. So let's then look at precipitation. And Chris, we've been at this for several years. This is kind of weird to put this on here.
First time. I think it's first time in 5 years we've put it on here.
First time in a long time, but we are going below normal precipitation. The La Nina pattern, the lack of subtropical jet stream, we're going to be below normal on precipitation.
Yeah, and you know, this is not to say you can't get a big event early winter and then dry out late, which is probably what actually looks like it could happen. We're talking about the 3-month period there, December, January, February, meteorological winter. Overall, we are going to likely end up below normal in our precipitation. Our precipitation for our area is roughly 12 to 15 inches over the winter time frame, those 3 months, the meteorological winter time frame. And we think we're going to come up below that.
Yeah, and you know, we extend that all the way into the mountains, into parts of East Tennessee. Now you get further north, again, where the jet stream is going to be established, you're probably going to have at or above normal precipitation.
Yep.
Again, centered over areas of Kentucky and up into West Virginia, the Ohio Valley, and probably the Northeast as well. Now, the last thing, and this is what everybody wants to see. I know you included, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My favorite time of year right here.
No doubt, Chris. Snowfall. Now, the thing you need to remember about snowfall in Western North Carolina with our yearly averages, usually one storm can do it as far as reaching your normal amounts. This year is going to be interesting in that we may not just have one big storm. It could be a year where we have kind of some nickel and dime events. I was looking back at some analogs from the 80s and from the 1990s and even 2017-18. That was the last La Nina we had. And we had several little events that kind of brought us to our average. So as of right now, we are going near normal for basically everybody west of Charlotte and western North Carolina, and then up toward Greensboro, because naturally we'll probably have some colder air up around Greensboro, and that works up into Roanoke and south central Virginia. Now, the one area for our mountains, and Chris, you could talk a little bit about this, we're going above normal. Tell them why.
Well, that's because of that northern jet stream setting up just off to our north and west there. Some of those cold fronts making it down to the south will transport, we believe, above normal precipitation into that area at times. Now, it's going to remain below normal over the whole period, but there will be several events with northwest flows behind these cold fronts where we get to the accumulating snow there in the North Carolina mountains, which does include some of our northern parts of the county, Little Switzerland, Jonas Ridge, Blowing Rock, Globe, up in there. And take a look at this too as we get into the slides coming up. It's not to say that some of those northwest snow flow events may be so strong that they spill out into the western foothills just a little bit, but not significantly.
Yeah, and we'll kind of go into our average snowfall amounts, and this is from the climate page of the National Weather Service in Greenville-Spartanburg. The amounts over the foothills, if you're in Marion and Lenoir, you're over 6 inches per year, close to 7 inches for Morganton, about 6.5 for Taylorsville, and then when you work your way down into Rutherford County at about 5 inches. That's a yearly average for snowfall.
Over the last 40 years.
Yeah, over the past 40 years. And with us going with a normal or close to normal snowfall, we feel like that we can reach those totals at some point this winter.
And some people may say, well, how are we going to end up with above normal snowfall when we're going below normal precipitation. But that's the case. Most of our snowfalls around here are somewhere in the neighborhood of a 10-to-1 ratio. Sometimes 15-to-1. But you can get, for every 1 inch of liquid, you get 10 inches of snow, is what that would mean. So you actually end up with more snow with less liquid around here. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dan, but that's kind of why you're seeing that anomaly in this forecast where we're going above average with snowfall, or near average with snowfall, and below average precipitation overall.
Yeah, just to give an example for these foothill locations, if you get 6 inches of snow generally during a snow event in our part of the country, that's only 0.6 of an inch of liquid.
Yep, that's right, absolutely.
And if you have one event where you have 0.6 of an inch of liquid, and then you don't have any weather for 10 or 14 days, then you can get behind on precipitation. But still, you can reach your averages. As we head into Piedmont, of course, areas like Shelby, around 4 inches of snow. That is the lowest of any of the totals in our coverage area. Lincolnton, a little bit further north and east, is close to 6 inches. And then, Chris, every year we have people ask us, how does Shelby, over the past 40 years, average over 7 inches of snow? And maybe you have Hickory, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hickory, average over 7 inches of snow. Give me your thoughts on what makes
So my thoughts on that is exactly what happened with Zeta, with the winds, right? So Zeta come up through here, and our western foothills were sheltered from most of that high wind event. Now, there was some sporadic wind damage. Obviously, you get that. But the South Mountains and that South Mountain range actually protects us. And, it goes east to about Eichard before it really flattens out into the Piedmont. So you kind of get that moisture surge around those South Mountains into the Hickory area. And also another aspect of that, talk about Taylorsville. When you go up from Hickory to Taylorsville, you gain elevation again going north into the Brushy Mountains. So there is some topographic issues there that cause the rising of the rise in the air that creates some locally heavier totals in those areas.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of validity to your thoughts on that, and it's just interesting. Hickory's had those higher amounts, but that's the way it has seemed to pan out. They are far enough north, and maybe they're getting more moisture transport where they kind of get the best of both worlds. So
I don't think Shelby gets in on it as much because they're sometimes right on that borderline where they mix a lot.
Yeah.
Down in those southern foothill counties, and the sleet can really tamper down those snowfall amounts. So I think that's why, even though they're on the outside of the South Mountains, on the southern side of the South Mountains, that's probably why you're only seeing an average of 4.2 inches annually there.
And that makes sense because if you go from Shelby to Lincolnton, you're making a decent northeast movement.
That's right, yeah.
So you're gaining a little bit of that to where you might be a little bit colder and you're not having as much mixing going on. Because we all know, and our folks in Charlotte, God bless them, they want snow all the time, and it just seems like they get something to happen to where that mix line runs right over 85.
And you change to rain so quickly there, even in Rutherfordton down there. You notice the total comes down after you go from just the short distance between Marion and Rutherfordton. You lose over an inch of snow there between the two, just because Rutherford, again, they're on that line. That I-74 corridor seems to be a line roughly through there. Weather events don't set up with interstates. It just so happens that we're able to mark them with those. But Rutherford's on the southern edge of that, and you get a lot of mixing down there. Even 30 minutes of mixing with sleet when you have a snow event can really compact totals, and that's probably why we are seeing the totals a little less there.
Yeah.
Talk about Marion a little bit, though, Dan. You live here, and those northwest flow snow events. You're closer to the mountains, closer to the Blue Ridge, so you do end up getting some of that northwest flow event.
Yeah, we've had some events in the past few years where Marion have actually picked up a dusting or so of snow.
Not a lot, but it does. I mean, those dustings, a half an inch of snow, is officially what they're measured as, so they add up. And why do you think that is?
Well, again, I think the close proximity to the mountains, it helps. Maybe, and I've always wondered about this, maybe a little bit of a relationship in distance from Mount Mitchell.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so.
I think there's a chance that, you get that highest slope east of the Mississippi, and then you're basically just downwind of it, that you could get some kind of, enhancement sometimes when you get the northwest flow events. And then, of course, you get further up to McDowell County, up toward North Cove and Ashford, there's times that they may have an inch or two snow on the ground, because they are literally right at the foot of the mountain.
That's true, they do. And we saw Lost Cove get flooded one time this summer. Locust Cove, I'm sorry, Locust Cove. And that was one of those instances where you had that band set right up off of Mount Mitchell there, and it just poured the rain over those folks for a short time, and there's where your snow develops. I think you're right. I think
precipitation patterns in that area it definitely is obvious. Sometimes you can see it set up there. So let's kind of go over the key points again for our winter outlook. And again, the primary jet stream pattern is going to keep us generally mild. It's going to originate from the Pacific, but there will be occasional buckles in the jet to direct cold air into the pattern. Precipitation, we feel like, is going to be below normal. That because of the developing La Nina, the lack of subtropical jet. And then the best chances, as we've said, of winter may be the first half of winter, because if that La Nina gets stronger, it's going to have more influence in the pattern.
It absolutely will, and really looks like we could have a very active late winter and early spring fire season across the area, because it does look like we dry out so much. So if you have some of those leaves and limbs and brush laying around, now may be the time to pick up on some burning days there where you can get that burnt off. Of course, get your permits from the North Carolina Forest Service before you do it. But do it early, because, we may get into a very dangerous spring fire season. Now's a good time, too, if you're taking a look at that. I know we're talking about winter, but making that defensible space around your house. We've got a lot of homes, especially here in McDowell County and Northwest Burke County, where you get the slope and the rhododendron and some of the leaves and brush is right up to the doorstep of the homes. And now may be a great time to take into account, clear some of that back and make preparations for the possibility of that. We're not saying it's going to happen, but certainly it does look like a very active late winter and early spring fire season, just because we're going to dry out.
Yeah, it's always good to be ahead of that and get some maintenance done, and hopefully if we do run into those issues, that you've got your property ready.
That's right, absolutely.
So that is our winter outlook for 2020-2021. We thank you for watching us, and just a reminder, you can always check out our forecast daily at foothillsweathernetwork.com. You can check out our social media accounts, our YouTube channel, and as always, download our app. It is a great resource to have wherever you may be, not only here in our coverage area, but anywhere around the country. So we're looking forward to this winter and what it may bring. And hopefully you guys enjoy this video, and hopefully we'll get at least one good winter storm for all our snow lovers. And I know we have folks who like mild weather. You may be happy with this as well. So
yeah, I think a good split.
Yeah, I think there's a chance we can make everybody happy. Once again, thanks to the folks at
Habaneros.
Oh,
yes, Habaneros. Whenever you're going up the sled in the mountains or build that snow fence or ski, be sure to stop by Habaneros. It's out there right off NC 181 on Independence Boulevard in the shopping center behind Hardee's there. Habaneros Mexican restaurant. They have some great burritos.
They sure do. So that is our winter outlook for 2020-21. As always, for the latest weather information, check us out, Foothills Weather Network. This is Daniel Crawley and Chief Meteorologist Christopher White.
Have a good